In this video, we're going to go through the Spotify for Artists for an artist with almost 90 million streams per month, which is absolutely bonkers, but I thought it'd be fun. I did this in the past for another artist that was even bigger than this, and everyone seemed to find it quite interesting, so we're going to do it again. You can check that video out right here if you haven't seen it already. And that artist is, I think, was in the top 300 biggest artists on Spotify. This artist not quite as big, but they're newer and more modern artists. This is an artist that every single one of you watching this video has heard of them, and most likely heard several of their songs. Like, they're that famous. You definitely know who it is. Like, 100%. I would be shocked if you didn't. So this is an artist. If we look at the last 12 months, they have gotten 1.3 billion streams. So absolutely ridiculous. And really what we're going to do is just kind of go through and just kind of see what it's like having this kind of gigantic streaming data, and maybe you'll be able to learn something from this. Like, how does this data look different for big artists compared to small artists? One big thing that is definitely unique that I've noticed with several huge artists that I've worked with, not necessarily ones that are this big, but ones that are 3 million, 5 million monthly listeners, 7 million monthly listeners, I've seen that they all typically have very good stream per listener, meaning that the people that they're attracting to their music are listening to a lot of their catalog or listening to their music on a regular basis. And so big thing I've noticed between big, like basically the bigger the artist gets, in a lot of the cases the higher this gets. Not necessarily the case that this number grows linearly with monthly listeners at all, but for example, there's an artist I know with about 1 million monthly listeners that's blown up. They went from like 100K to 1 million over the last like 2 years. They have like an 8 or a 9. But a lot of big artists that I've worked with do have very high stream per listener. So that's a common trend. But what I want to focus on first, if we look at the last 12 months, we're going to go look at streams, and I want to show you the breakdown of streams. So keep in mind, this is a artist, every single one of you know, they're in the kind of pop, hip-hop space. So a lot of people will claim that an artist like this is being dominated by editorial playlists. So we're just going to see if that's true. I don't think it's going to be true because, spoiler alert from the last video, that wasn't the case for that artist, but let's see. So, for example, we have active sources. This is like their actual fan base, either coming from social media, coming from ads, coming from other marketing, or fans re-listening. Then we want to include editorial, personalized editorial, third-party playlisting, algorithmic, and radio. And this is how we're going to compare everything. So here you might notice that the blue is dominating everything. This is the artist's actual fans. This is what they're driving to their music from either, again, social media, ads, or just fans re-listening. And you notice that is just crushing everything. This is the breakdown down here. Out of 1.3 billion streams, 900 million are from that. So just to make this easier to read, I'm going to turn off active sources just because now we can see this much easier. So again, 1.3 billion streams is what we're looking at for the whole pie. Out of those 1.3 billion, 10% are from algorithmic playlists, and another 10% are from radio, right? And remember, we had about 70-80% from active sources. So the editorial coverage here, 11 million plus 7 million, that's 18 million, we'll call it. It's actually a little less than 18 million, but 18 million streams out of 1.3 billion are editorial. So this artist is the second massive artist that we've looked at. Again, major label too. So if the major labels owned and were dominating the editorials, I think I would expect more here. Not saying that major labels don't dominate the playlist, but it seems to be a complete myth that big artists are mostly just being propelled by these editorial playlists. Definitely not the case. Now, you can make that argument for algorithmic. Maybe major labels are influencing the algorithm, but honestly, I think the biggest thing I've learned looking at several big artists is they just have lots of fans. That's why they're big artists, right? It's not, maybe at first there's some manipulation thing happening, but honestly, it just seems like it's not happening on the Spotify side. They just have a ton of fans. The fans are re-listening and whatever. Obviously, there's tons of problems that actually do happen with major label artists and Spotify not treating indie artists necessarily in the same scale as major label artists or just big artists in general. But it's not at least editorial playlists problem. So very interesting, right? Makes sense. Big artists with lots of fans. No surprise here. They have a lot of fans. So let's clear that out. Now, if we look at followers, I just kind of want to see what happened with that. So this is only over the last 12 months. Interestingly enough, this artist hasn't really changed that much, which is not, I guess, not too surprising when you have 5.4 million followers. They already have a base, right? So we're going to move on to a different topic. Let's look at the demographic and location data here. So Demographically, one thing I'm noticing here is that this is a very steep graph. Most of the time, smaller artists, indie artists I'm usually working with have a much more gradual curve here. And part of that's probably just because of the way that their music's being promoted, right? They're newer artists, or they're typically using ads. They might be using tons of social media content. They might be doing playlisting. They might be doing right? There's a million things you might do. And each of those things can influence the kind of spectrum of ages and genders you get. This artist, I don't know the extent of their marketing, right? But I do know that they blew up on social media. Like they didn't come from social media, but they do incredibly well on social media, and they're regularly popping up and be having viral posts and stuff like that. So it does make sense to me that the majority of their audience is younger. I don't think that's the only part of it, though. This artist is kind of always following trends, for better or for worse. And it kind of makes sense that they're kind of always going back to this 18 to 34 age range. I just wasn't expecting to be this dramatic. Now, interestingly enough, this artist I would have expected to actually be more female-oriented, because they're a good-looking individual dating another good-looking individual, but they're I don't want to spoil who it is. You can probably figure it out with all these clues, but I would have expected a little bit more of a female split. If you figure out who it is, you're going to be like, oh, wow, I probably wouldn't have expected this. So, now, if you have any guesses of who this is in the comments, please don't write it in the comments, because I'm not going to confirm or deny, because I don't know why I get access to their page. Well, I kind of do, but I don't know if I'm supposed to be showing it. That's why I'm keeping it anonymous. So I'm not going to confirm or deny it. Please don't share it if you figure it out. Just enjoy for yourself if you figure out who it is. Let's look at locations, though. So locations, they are a USA-based artist, I believe, unless they're Canadian, but I'm pretty sure they're from the States. And most of their audience is from gigantic Tier 1 countries. But they still actually do have a fairly big amount of people in some of these countries that artists deem as like undesirable. You know, for example, a lot of artists, they try to avoid doing Philippines and India and Indonesia and stuff. And some of it's for good reason. Like running ads in those countries can be very squirrely. Like it doesn't always work the way it should work. But obviously there are a lot of real people living in the Philippines and Indonesia and India, especially India, right? It's over 1 billion people, right? So you do see a pretty wide spread here, which makes sense. But it's actually kind of shocking how much of a dominant lead they have in USA specifically compared to all these other countries. Like, I am shocked at how much is skewed towards the US for this artist. All right, so now we're going to take a look at some of these streams for the tracks, but I'm going to have to blur out all these track names and artworks here. I'm also going to have to blur out the dates released just to make it a little bit harder to figure out exactly who it is. And I'm only going to look at the last 7 days too, so you can't confirm with the 28-day window that you would see on Spotify. But let's look at the streams we're getting in the last 7 days, because this, I think, kind of shows how much this fan base is listening through the entire catalog. 2.4 million streams in the last week for this one. And this one is a feature with another artist who I believe is like top 500 in the world, so it makes sense. This is also one with a feature. So these two songs are, this one in the top, I will say, came out in 2024. This one right below it came out in 2020. And it was also a feature. So, but the second one is one of their biggest tracks ever. It's their #1 all-time stream song, I'm fairly certain. So it's interesting, their new song has actually overtaken it, which is very interesting. But what's also very interesting, this is their biggest song ever, but in the last 7 days, look at, like, some of these other songs are competing with it. This here is with an artist who's in the top 100. This here is with another artist in the top 500. So there's a lot of features in here. This one's featuring another artist in the top 200. So a bunch of huge tracks here, but look at, like, how many streams these are getting per week. It really does seem like if this was imagine this was a playlist. Like, you send 2.4 million people to this playlist that we're imagining. About half of them drop off when they get to the next one. But then most of the people that get there are listening through to song number 9 or 10. And then after that, it starts to fall off more. But it's actually pretty shocking to me how many people are listening to so many songs in their catalog. They might not be the same people, right? It might be different people listen to these, different people listen to these. But I would imagine that their fan base is just streaming a ton of their songs, which you would expect, I guess, with an artist that's this established. Now, I'm guessing this might be a little bit interesting. This is the segment section that most people probably never look at, but we can see what percentage of their audience is active, and we see 11% is active in the past month, 50% were previously active, and 40% are programmed. So again, this kind of confirms the theory that the biggest artists out there just have really big active audiences that check them out. Like, yes, they get a ton of programming, they get radio, and they get Discover Weekly, and they get these editorials, but it's still it's more than 50% active or previously active, which is neat. If we go into active, we can see what the breakdown is for these. It is mostly light listeners defined by Spotify, which I think for this artist really, really makes sense because they're definitely a single-oriented artist. Like, they have albums, of course, but they're very single-heavy in terms of what they promote and release, but they have 60% light. But they still do actually have a nice breakdown between moderate and super listeners. Just to give you the flip side in this, let's take a look at an artist that is dramatically small. I'm just going to pick a random one. All right, so here is an artist with 4,000 monthly listeners, so completely different scale here, right? First thing you're going to notice, the stream per listener is way down. One big reason is that this artist's catalog is way smaller. They're way newer than the artists we were just looking at. The follower count's way smaller as well. If we go to segments, though, we can see the difference. They have 1% active, 28% previously, 71% programmed. So a lot more programmed, which really just means that Spotify is gifting them a higher percentage of streams. So it kind of... it makes you wonder, like, these bigger artists are actually the ones pulling people to the platform. They're getting less percentage-wise programmed coverage compared to a lot of indies. Now, that's not always going to be the case, but like, let's flip to a random one again, and we'll see how that compares. All right, here's another random one I just clicked on. This one has 38,000 monthly listeners. Stream per listener is a 3. They have a slightly bigger catalog than the last one, but if we go over to segments, we see 9% active, 74% programmed, right? So again, another smaller artist, different size, has a much bigger percent programmed than active. So it kind of almost seems like Spotify actually gives more programming to smaller artists. It might not be something they do intentionally. It might just be like these bigger artists, they drive so many people to the platform that Spotify can't keep up with the amount of radio and algorithmic playlist coverage that they're given. But this, and I also checked some other artists off camera before this, but it does seem like the program percentage seems to be just higher for smaller artists, which is honestly kind of the opposite of what I was expecting. Here's a different one. This artist has 6,000 monthly listeners. If we take a look at it, they have a 62% programmed audience. And on the flip side, let's look at this. This is the artist we looked at in that last video I mentioned. So this is the 25 million monthly listeners, 142 million streams. Look at the segments. 35% programmed, right? So same thing, mostly active and smaller program. So, take that for what it's worth, but it's kind of interesting because I feel like a lot of people, and myself included, would have intuitively assumed the opposite. But it's interesting. So yeah, let me know what you found interesting from all of this in the comments below. And if you have any guesses, as I said, please just maybe hint at it, but don't just say who it is, because we want to keep it a mystery here. But anyways, if you found this helpful, please subscribe, like the video, watch more videos, and specifically maybe watch this video right here that shows you how to run ad campaigns to promote your music and streaming sites from start to finish. We've got the whole process there. And this video under it is whatever YouTube thinks you should watch. So check that out. And yeah, thanks for watching. See you next video. Bye.